How's it going, Diablo friends? Today I'm going to be showing you yet another new lightning build. And similar as my last chain lightning build, this is also based on the X-Falls Corroded Signet and the Tal Rasha ring. But this one is going to be charge bolts. So if you already tried my chain lightning build, you can pretty much use the same gear for this build. There's really not so much of a difference here. But yeah, this build here has so many numbers, it is like completely ridiculous. It has amazing clear speed, you can clear Uber Lilith, you can insta-gip bosses in like 10 seconds. Like, this build is really great, while you can play at a range if you want to. So in this build we take advantage of the stuff of Lam Isen, or however you pronounce that thing. And you pretty much have a zerg of charge bolts going forward in front of you and pretty much eating everything up. Also, we can take advantage of charge bolts actually having true area of effect. Since if a charge bolt hits one enemy with at least 3 bolts, it will explode. Which basically means we can deal our damage in an area of effect, and also we can apply our lucky hit in an area of effect. That's why in this build you get like so many static ball lightnings from the ball lightning enchant, and also we get a lot of power from the X-Falls Corroded Signet's explosion here. Furthermore, we have a very low cooldown on unstable currents, and whenever we use unstable currents, it's basically gonna turn us into an unstoppable lightning god. You can find all links to the sections of this guide as well as to the planner in the description down below. Also, make sure to check out my X-Falls Tal Rasha chain lightning build in the description down below. These two builds are pretty similar, so you can pretty much use them with the same gear, so you might just choose the one you like more here. And before we get into the actual guide, let me just explain real quick how this build works, what synergies we're using, and why this build feels so amazing. Alright, so in this build we're using the unique stuff, and the unique stuff's effect actually makes our charge bolts last 300% longer and be attracted to enemies. Normally, if you use charge bolts, you have to go into every enemy's face, because they have a very short range and they will not hit enemies properly unless you go directly in front of them. By using the unique staff we can get around this, and our charge bolts will actually hit the enemies no matter where we fire them. We combine that with the aspect of piercing static, and that will furthermore make our static bolts pierce. And they pierce through the enemies, and then they hit the next one and the next one and the next one, and they pretty much explode on every enemy, dealing AoE damage. This basically means a single cast of charged bolts can actually hit like 10 enemies 10 times or something like that. So basically it hits the first one in an AoE, so it hits the entire group. Then it pierces through the first enemy, hits the second one, and AoEs to the entire group again. Then it pierces through the third one and hits the entire group again, and so on and so on and so on. And that gives us a great opportunity to apply lucky hit effects, because we can get a lot of hits out of our charge bolts. Those lucky hit effects are, first of all, the ball lightning enchant, which is doing a lot of damage, and you can see a lot of static ball lightning enchants on the ground in this build. Second, it's gonna stun enemies using the convulsions passive. Third, it's gonna regenerate our mana, because we have a very high mana return on lucky hit. Fourth, it's gonna generate crackling energy for us. And last but not least, together with the Firebolt enchant, it's going to trigger the explosions from the X-Falls Corroded Signet. We can also use the Infection Vampiric Power here to boost the bonus damage from our Tal Rasha ring to 60%. Remember, poison damage counts as a stack for the Tal Rasha ring. And also we can use a lot of additional Vampiric Powers, because we do not have to use the Vampiric Curse in this build at all, because we have such a high attack speed and our charge bolts actually hit in an area of effect that it's totally enough to just use the static surge node for apply vulnerable and also gain some extra mana regeneration. This allows us to get the 45 from the Sanguine Brace Vampiric Power, which gives us another 10% damage decrease, as well as a nice 8% buff to our critical strike chance. The build is also very defensive, because we can take advantage of a lot of damage decrease nodes from our skill tree. First of all, we can use the destructive charge bolts for a 25% damage decrease. Then we can use Mana Shield for another 21%. And last but not least, we use Electrocution for another 15%. That's a 61% 10% damage increase coming from our skill tree alone. There you have it, the short description of this build. Make sure to check out the links to the sections of this guide in the description down below. Check out the planner link and also check out my other build guides at the very bottom of the description. And now let's go into the detailed guide. The skill tree. So we put 2 points into Firebolt since we're using the Firebolt enchant and to get access to core skills. Then we max out Charge Bolt with Enhanced Charge Bolts and Destructive Charge Bolts. These are going to give us a nice damage reduction. We put 1 point into Flame Shield, 1 point into Teleport, 1 point into Enhanced Teleport, 1 point into Shimmering Teleport for additional damage reduction, 1 point into Ice Armor, then 1 point into Elemental Attunement and 3 points into Glass Cannon. So this is a pretty basic setup here. And then we put 3 points into Precision Magic, since this is a lucky hit build. 1 point into Ice Blades, we just need this for a Tal Rasha stack here. 1 point into Align the Elements, 3 points into our defensives, Mana, Shield and Protection to keep our barrier up. Then we put 3 points into Conjuration Mastery here. This is the first optional. This is going to give you a lot of bonus damage against bosses, but it's gonna make you weaker because you're not gonna have the lightning spare stun. So if you struggle with, you know, getting hit too much, not having enough stun while you're going to the Nightmare Dungeons, definitely take these into Lightning Spare, Enhanced Lightning Spare and Invoked Lightning Spare. This is completely optional. You're gonna lose a little bit of boss damage, but it's not a huge deal. Then we put 1 point into Inner Flames and 3 points into Devouring Blaze. If you have a +3 Devouring Blaze amulet, that is of course great. Then we max out Ball Lightning and 1 point into Enhanced Ball Lightning and 1 point into Wizard's Ball Lightning. Then 1 point into Static Discharge. The 5% for me is enough to get enough Crackling Energy to stay up on Crackling Energy. And 3 points into Invigorating Conduit. This is just for some extra mana regeneration. If you happen to have the staff with like max, you probably can get away without these 3 points here. There's also an option to do Fury Surge instead of these 3 points. You're gonna do a little bit of less regeneration with bosses, but this is gonna help you a lot with regeneration in Nightmare Dungeons, for example. Then we put 1 point into Unstable Currents, 1 point into Prime Unstable Currents, and 1 point into Supreme Unstable Currents, 1 point into Causing Currents, 3 points into Electrocution for the damage reduction, and 3 points into Convulsions for the stun. And our key passive is Overflowing Energy. This is the general skill build. If you wanna do like Uber Lilith, so you go to a complete single target scenario, you change Overflowing Energy to Verse Mastery. And furthermore, you would probably get rid of some defensives like Mana Shield and put them into Static Discharge just to get a little bit more mana regeneration. You will also be able to probably take some points into Elemental Dominance. Basically, just remove more defensive if you're in single target mode. But for the general build, this is the general build without any adjustments. Works just fine. Works for bosses, works for Nightmare Dungeons. Period. For the skills and enchantments, we use Unstable Currents as our ultimate. This is pretty much mandatory for all lightning builds. We use Ice Blades. These are just going to be used to get additional stack for the Tal Rasha ring. Teleport, for obvious reasons, get around, and also the damage reduction. Flame Shield is our main defensive ability. Then Charge Bolts is our main attack ability and our main lucky hit applicator. Ice Armor is really nice defensive ability, you want to use as often as possible. Then we're still going to use the Ball Lightning enchant. This simply just does so much damage in this build because you are going to be spawning like so many of them. And we use the Firebolt enchant to trigger Burning Synergy and also to feed our X-Falls Corroded Signet ring to get those nice little fire explosions off. Legendary aspects and unique items. So on our helmet, we use the aspect of Fortune. This is a lucky hit based build, so we want to get as much lucky hit as possible. Because we are using a two-handed stuff here, so we are already losing a lot of lucky hit from our wand and our focus. So we really have to stay on top of our lucky hit in this build. Then we take the aspect of Disobedience. This is pretty much mandatory for every build. And furthermore, we take the Ever-Living aspect for another 25% damage reduction. Then we are using the aspect of Piercing Static. This makes our Charge Bolt pierce, and this is pretty much enabling all these Charge Bolt explosions on top of each other. We use the Conceited aspect on our Amulet. You can probably also use the Stormswell for a little bit of extra damage. I just like the Conceited aspect here, since we don't have Vulnerable up immediately. We just have to wait for our Static Surge to trigger. So I like to take the Conceited one here. And that's already it for legendary aspects, because the rest is unique items. So let's start with the rings. We use the X-Force Corroded Signet here. This is going to trigger a nice fire explosion from our burning damage, which is applied by the Firebolt enchantment. Try to get as much cooldown reduction and lucky hit as possible. The explosion damage is not super important. You can definitely get away with getting lower explosion damage if you have the other stats being high. Then we use the Tal Rasha ring. Again, here, look for the highest resource generation, lucky hit, and cooldown reduction. The 15% is actually not so important. You can easily get away with like 13.5. But, you know, it might take some time to farm yourself a decent Tal Rasha's ring. Then we use the stuff of Lam Isen, or however you're going to pronounce this. This is a pretty big trade-off, because we lose like Wand and Focus, which gives us so much great stats. And this stuff, yeah, it gives like more than 200% additive damage. It gives us the nice resource gain on hit, but still it's a very, very big trade-off. But this build works better with it. I tried it with Wand and Focus, it just works better with this stuff here. Important here is the percent chance of charge bolts being attracted. This is definitely the most important stat. The second most important stat then is the resource generation here. And then we use the Asus boots for our critical strike chance. Most important stat here, definitely mana cost reduction and movement speed. The critical strike chance increase is also important, so you want to have at least 25%, I guess. You don't want to have a low roll. But since these drop when farming Warshan, it should be pretty easy to get like a decent pair of these. So let's go through the items and stat priorities. As always, you find the link to the planner with the dream stats in the description down below. So let's get started. On our helm, we want to have lucky hit chance, total armor, cooldown reduction, and maximum mana or maximum life. Both are great. Maximum mana gives you a little bit more mana sustain, so if you struggle with mana, try maximum mana. If you don't struggle with mana, definitely try to get maximum life here. On our chest piece, we want total armor, maximum life, and 2 damage reduction stats. This is a pretty good piece. You can also have like all stats. It helps if you have one piece with all stats, because again, with our 200 stuff, we don't have main stat and we don't have all stats on our weapon. So it helps a little bit to reach the break point in the Paragon board if you have all stats on here. But definitely damage reduction, total armor, maximum life is great stats for your armor. On our gloves, we want attack speed, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and resource generation. This is pretty much a very good piece here. If you can only get 3 out of 4, you can probably drop the attack speed here. For example, you could get ranks of Charge Bolt instead of that. On our pants, we want to go pure defenses, total armor, damage reduction stats, and ball lightning stats. Definitely nice also if you have a life roll here. I have like no life rolls on my armor pieces, which is like super annoying. I just can't find them. I have been searching forever. That's why my life is like very low. I only have like 12.5k, so definitely try to get some life rolls on those armor pieces. It's gonna help a lot. And then on our amulet, you wanna have cooldown reduction, movement speed, mastery skills, and devouring blaze ideally. I have percent intelligence, so just swap percent intelligence here with cooldown reduction and you have the perfect piece. Mastery skills is great to boost the ball lightning damage. It's definitely not required, but it's a good stat to have. Vampiric Powers, there's actually a lot of options we can do. Because we are actually not running the Prey on the Weak and the Accursed Touch combination here to apply Vulnerable and Vampiric Curse, it opens up a lot of different builds with your Vampiric Powers. What I would say is mandatory for this build, definitely Ravenous, we need the attack speed, definitely Undying. These are like super great. Then Sanguine Embrace is definitely also great. It gives a 10% damage reduction and 8% critical strike chance. So I really encourage you to get this one. Then we have Anticipation for more ultimate cooldown reduction. You can definitely skip this if you have more cooldown reduction. Like I'm missing cooldown reduction on my amulet, for example. So if you get cooldown reduction on your amulet, you could definitely skip this one here. And also, Infection is optional. It gives the forced Tal Rasha stack and it does quite a bit of damage, but it's still optional. So if you struggle with survivability, you can definitely, for example, get Resilience here. Resilience is great. You have room for it if you want to get it. This is, for example, a great option to get. If you struggle with mana regeneration in general or in boss fights, you can definitely go for Feed the Coven. When you have Unstable Current active, this pretty much gives you infinite mana and 10% damage boost as well. Okay, this Paragon board is a little bit more damage focused than I usually build my Paragon boards, because we have additional damage reduction from our skill tree because we're using charged bolts, and we also need to pick up maximum mana from our Paragon board. I just have to get a little bit less defensive with the Paragon here. So let's go through the first board. We just pick up the non-physical damage and the ore resistance here, and we put in the Elementalist glyph for 15% multiplicative damage increase. Then let's move over to the Enchantment Master board. We pick up the non-physical damage and auras here again. Then we put in the Tactician glyph for another 10% multiplicative damage after casting a defensive skill. And then we pick up those non-physical damage nodes here. You can definitely get these ones if you happen to find points to put there from like a different board. I didn't really find good solution to get these. I guess it needs like 8 or 9 nodes to get here, so just keep in mind you can go for these. These are totally optional here. Then moving over to the Keyless Conduit board, we pick up all these nice damage to elite nodes at the bottom here. Then we put in our Destruction Glyph with the maximum dexterity. This is just too good to not use it. It gives 12% multiplicative damage and also a nice 194% critical strike damage. Pick up the lightning damage here and move over to the next board. That is going to be the Elemental Summoner. This is like a board you probably usually don't get in this kind of variation. We pick up the non-physical damage nodes here at the bottom, and we pick up the maximum mana and maximum life nodes here. We need a high mana pool because our mana regeneration is solely based on lucky hit, so that's why we're definitely picking up some nodes. Keep in mind that you follow the Paragon board exactly, because if you don't have any alt stats on your gear, or your X-Falls Corroded Signet is maybe like just 1 point weaker, you have to like restructure the Paragon a tiny bit just to make sure you have to get the 430 willpower here for the extra 8 mana. That's like super important. And then we put in the Charge Glyph here. The Crackling Energy damage doesn't matter, but this gives us a 15% multiplicative damage increase, and we pick up the Ore Resistance nodes here at the bottom. You could definitely, if you have an item which gives all stats, you can also get like the 440 willpower here, which is another 3% to all resistance, which is definitely nice to get. Then let's move over to the next board. That is going to be the Static Surge board. We pick up the mana nodes here again and the damage to stun. The damage to stun is nice, but doesn't really matter all that much. And then we pick up the damage to stun here just for the intelligence bonus. And we put in the Exploit glyph here for another 10% multiplicative damage. We don't really care so much about the additive part here. We really don't have many nodes to spend. That's why I'm just using this with 27 dexterity here. We pick up the legendary node Static Surge. This helps a lot with mana regeneration, but this is also our only applicator of vulnerable in this build. But since we are attacking very fast, and our charge bolts do area of effect damage. This is quite nice, and I don't have any issues with getting enemies vulnerable fast enough. Then on the way to the next board, we pick up those damage to elite and damage to stunt nodes here. And we move over to the last board. That's going to be the Frigid Fate board. We pick up Frigid Fate. It gives bonus damage of 25% multiplicative to all vulnerable enemies. So this gives bonus damage to all enemies. It doesn't have to be cold damage. We pick up the damage reduction from vulnerable here, and we move over, pick up the vulnerable damage, and we put in the Flame Feeder Glyph. Again, we just have 29 dexterity. We only care about the 10% multiplicative damage increase. We don't care so much about the additive part. And then we pick up the cold resistance here just to get access to these dexterity nodes. So we pick up a little bit less additive damage in this board to get additional legendary nodes here. And it's still like more than enough additive damage, but it's more focused to get the multiplicative damage and get the increased mana for our mana pool, because our mana regeneration again is lucky hit based. We need a high mana pool. In our items we have like 50 to 60% mana restore on lucky hit. So basically that means if you lucky hit and restore mana, and that's 50 to 60%, you have like 160 mana and you restore 50%, you basically restore 75 mana if you do the lucky hit. So it needs to be high, because, you know, if you don't restore mana like 3 or 4 or 5 hits in a row, then actually you're gonna get mana stuffed. Well, you can still pick up Crackling Energy, and you also still have the Static Surge node. Usually you will not run out of mana, but if you wouldn't have a high enough mana pool, it will certainly happen. So I highly encourage you to get like at least 160 mana pool in this build. There you have it. That's my X-Falls Tal Rasha's Charge Bolt build, and I really enjoy this build. It deals a lot of damage and it has so many numbers, and I just like numbers. And I'm going to leave you like 2 full Nightmare Dungeons and Uber Lilith now, and that's it for me, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching, and I see you guys next time.